welcome everyone who is joining us for today's reactor session. If you haven't already done so, please feel free to check in using the details on the screen. I'm happy to paste them into the chat as well. So this session will run over the next 60 minutes. It is being recorded, and like all of the sessions that we do, it will be made available to watch on demand. So it will go on to the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. And again, I'll paste that link into the chat so you have that readily available. So today's session is getting started using Windows Subsystem for Linux. As I mentioned, it will run over the next 60 minutes. And today it's being delivered by Alan Sanders. So we're welcoming Alan back. And Alan's a senior cloud architect and has over 25 years experience. So lots to learn today. Before we get started, I just want to quickly run over our code of conduct. So this is really just a reminder to everyone who's with us today to be aware of one another, be friendly and patient throughout. So it is a very inclusive environment that we have today. So if there are any differences of opinions that we see throughout the chat or Q&A, just to really be mindful of that and understanding of those differences. So, Alan, I will hand over to you now to kick us off.
All right, sounds great. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Great to be here with you. Let me start up my presentation and let me share my screen, and then we will get going right away. All right, so thanks, Emma, for that introduction and for kicking us off and for all of that helpful support. Do recognize that there is the chat feature, obviously, for questions. So as we kind of proceed through the session today, if you have questions about a particular area that we're covering off on, please feel free to post it there. I'll try to answer them as interactively as I can. I will sort of warn you that there's a lot of material to go through today, and this will likely be one of those sessions that you'll want to, sort of go back and walk through again, both the documentation, if you want to walk through the video. At the end, I will provide a link to a GitHub repo that has my slides in it, so that you can kind of leverage that information as well. But there is a pretty rich available set of features with Windows Subsystem for Linux, and we're going to try to hit as many of them as we can, at least high level, and hopefully this will position you for kind of a springboarding from there and digging a little deeper. So let's go ahead and get going. So what are the reactors? Well, the reactors are us, right? It's community members that are able to come together and learn from one another, which I think is great. In technology today, things are constantly changing. Seems like there's something new to learn every day. And so having something like the reactors where we can meet and learn from one another, I think is a great tool to have in our tool belt as we proceed on this technology journey. So great to have you here. Great to be here with you. It is truly an honor and a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to this subject. One of the cool things about the reactors is that there are locations all over the world. So, should be something hopefully close to where you are. I hope there's a time when we can actually meet again in person. But until such time, we have these virtual sessions available. So I'm actually currently in Columbus, Ohio. So, so maybe many miles from where you might be located, but we still have the opportunity to connect and to learn from one another as part of this community. So code of conduct, Emma talked about that, and that is very, very important, right? So learning takes patience with ourselves, patience with others. So let's really be kind and supportive as a community as we proceed through this. So getting started with Windows Subsystem for Linux. Well, south of England, great. You got it. I have been, and I'll have a slide about myself here, just with a picture of me here in a minute that looks very different, no beard. But as Emma said, I've been doing this for about 25 plus years, architecture, design, development. I've worked in several, sort of large verticals. I've done smaller sort of consulting as well. The one thing that I want you to know about me, though, that I think is most important is that I have a passion for learning. I have a passion for my own learning. I have a passion for others, and that's why I do this. And so the reason I tell you a little bit more about that is because over my career, probably for the first 20 or so years of it, my focus was Windows, right? Only Windows. I only did Windows. I did .NET. But in the last 5 or 6 years, I've seen my development perspective and world sort of open up. And that has led me to do more development on a Mac OS, right? On Mac OS, and do more development in Linux. Now, making that transition can be a little interesting, right? So maybe you're here and you've done Windows for all of your career, and now you're considering getting into Linux. Maybe you've done Linux and you'd like to be able to bring the two together. Windows Subsystems for Linux, or WSL, as it is sometimes affectionately called, is a great way for us to do that, right? Is a great way for us to bring sort of the best of those, both of those worlds together. We're going to see that we can, so in some cases, if you decided to, utilize Linux, you might stand up a VM, right? And install Ubuntu on that VM, SSH into that VM, and then leverage the terminal that way. What we're going to be talking about here is a way to install a Linux distribution running natively within Windows 10, which I think is very, very cool. So we'll get into sort of the mechanics of how to do that, and then we'll look at some of the things that are available to us once we have done that setup. Okay, there's a picture of me without a beard many, many years ago. Already talked about that. Agenda, let's talk agenda. So again, we have a lot that we're going to try to go through. I delivered one of these sessions yesterday evening, and people felt like I maybe moved a little too quickly through it. So we'll we'll kind of navigate this together. I do, though, will encourage you that this is one of those sessions that you're gonna want to go back, watch again, walk through the documentation again, practice as well. I'm Mayor. All right, so we're going to talk introduction. We're going to talk the mechanics of installing a Linux distribution in Windows 10. We'll talk about the fact that once we do that, we have rich integration between the Windows OS and the Linux distribution that's running within Windows 10. We'll look at adding Node to our Linux distribution. And then we'll look at how WSL can integrate with Visual Studio Code to make for a pretty nice developer experience. And part of the reason why we might go down the WSL route is because there are so many tools available, right? So many different approaches available from a development perspective. And we're going to look at a great tool, Visual Studio Code, that I think can really help with that. We, depending on how much time we have left, we might do a knowledge check, and then we'll have a summary that we kind of walk through to sort of wrap up. All right, so let's talk introduction. So what is WSL? Well, it's a feature that can be enabled in modern versions of Windows. And with WSL2, there's a couple iterations. With WSL2, you're able to run a full Linux distribution natively using Hyper-V within Windows 10. And, basically it gives you a Linux terminal, just like you'd have on a Ubuntu box, right? It gives you a Linux terminal that you can interact with using all of the Linux commands that you've maybe come to know and love, or maybe that you're just trying to get sort of used to for the first time. It gives us the ability to navigate back and forth between the file systems. Modern dev tools are supported, right? Python, Node.js, .NET Core. If you've done anything with .NET Core, it is a fantastic framework. And it really gives us, as I said, sort of the best of both worlds, powerful capabilities, both on the Windows 10 side as well as on the Linux side, all on a single machine. So this particular link here, and should be in the when you check in as well. you should have that available, but hold on. Let me grab it and I'm going to paste it into our chat here. Go ahead and hit that link. And that will take you to a Microsoft Learn module that we're going to be working off of, right? And this is what you'll probably likely want to go back and kind of review again after our time together. But Microsoft Learn is a fantastic platform, in my opinion. It does a great job of bringing together documentation, links, information, as well as exercises. You can earn points that then can be utilized for, gaining, trophies and awards, that kind of thing, which is kind of fun, right? But it's a great learning platform. And there are a myriad of subjects that are covered and available for coverage within the platform. So we're going to be walking through this sort of set here, and you can follow along with me. I'm going to show you how to install WSL, but I do warn you, when you install, when you enable that feature, it does require a reboot of your machine. So if you do that during our time together, you're likely to lose your connection to the meeting. So maybe something that you'll want to look at and do after the fact. But I'll walk you through the steps as we go. All right, so that's introduction, which we already talked about. Let's look at, what does, are folks able to see the different windows? Or are you only seeing the presentation? Let me ask that. Are you able to see the browser as well currently? Yes. Only the browser, okay. But what about now? Now do you see the PowerPoint?
Yeah, we can see the PowerPoint
Excellent.
now, Alan.
Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying. I just want to make sure my entire screen was showing, not just the single window. So thanks for verifying that. All right, so let's come back here to the presentation, look at a couple of sort of steps that we can walk through for installing and enabling and setting this up, right? So we can use PowerShell to enable this optional feature. It is going to require a restart. Once it's enabled, you can go out to the Microsoft Store and get one or more distributions of Linux, right, and install them. And then you now have access to a distribution, a terminal within that distribution running within Windows 10. On the first run of your distribution, it's going to ask you to set up a username and a password. So we'll sort of show that here. And then we'll talk about ways that you can update that distribution to ensure any recent patches get applied. And really, that's something that you'll want to do probably on an ongoing basis as part of just care and feeding for your distribution that's installed, just like running Windows Update. And there is actually support for installation of custom distributions, which we won't have a chance to get into, but I think is kind of cool. Okay, so let's look at what this mechanically looks like. Now, I already have Windows Subsystem for Linux running on my machine. So walking through the steps on my machine, it's not really going to be maybe helpful. So what I have done instead is I have stood up a Windows 10 VM in Azure. And I'm going to, and that's a fresh VM, right? I'm going to actually RDP into that VM. And then I'll walk you through the steps on that VM so you can sort of see the whole process from beginning to end. Bear with me for 1 second here. Okay. So again, this is just a Windows 10 VM, sort of vanilla, running within Azure. But it gives us a chance to sort of see what this process looks like fresh. So let's just set that up. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate to PowerShell. And I'm going to run Windows PowerShell as an administrator. And let me increase the size of that so maybe it's easier to see. Okay. And so let me clear the screen. There's a commandlet called get Windows optional, and I'm just going to tab for autocomplete. Get Windows optional feature. I can pass it the -online flag and then -feature name, Windows, oh, sorry, Microsoft -Windows, and I'll just use a wildcard there. And that should bring up a feature for WSL. Microsoft Windows Subsystem for Linux is the feature that we're looking for. And right now you see that it is currently disabled. So I'm going to copy this. And then down here, I'm going to, instead of getting the feature, I'm going to enable Windows optional feature. Still the -online flag, -feature name, but this time I'm going to paste the name that I want to install. Now this is going to enable that feature, and then it's going to ask for a reboot. So after this completes, it's going to say, do you want to restart the computer to complete? I'm going to say yes, because this is VM. We'll let that sort of come together, or, you know, spin back up. That'll take a second or two. But that's really the first step, right? If you're looking to stand this up on your own machine, in your own environment, the first step would be to enable that optional feature. And then we'll see that the second step is actually to go out and get the distribution that we're interested in. So let's see if we're back up yet. And so if you were building this out on Windows Server 2019, which is also valid as well, you likely aren't going to have access to the Microsoft Store. So there are actually browser links for each of these distributions as well that you could utilize to pull what you need. Okay, so I'm going to go to the Microsoft Store now. And I'm going to search for Ubuntu. That's the one that we're going to run today. I'm going to use 20.04 long-term support. Use this version. And then what I'm able to do here is, obviously, as with any app, right, in the App Store, I'm not going to sign in. I get the app, right? And then once I have it, I can install it. And so that's going to download. We'll see how quickly that downloads. Actually running pretty quickly. And once this downloads, right, and you know, is available, and installed, we have access to a Linux terminal running within Windows 10, which I just think is very, very cool. All right, so it's installed. If we you know, look here, we can type Ubuntu, and we see that we have the app installed. If I launch that, now there's still, this is the first time I'm running it, so it's final installation steps that are executing here, and then we'll see shortly, it's going to ask me for a Unix username and then a password. So that takes just, it doesn't take really a few minutes necessarily, it does take a couple of seconds though. So this is the second step. First step, enable that feature. Second step, go get a distribution, right? And you can get other distributions. I could run Linux alongside this, right? I could get that distribution from the Microsoft Store and have both installed. And there's a way to sort of switch between them, right? And set which one you want to be, like your default, or the one that, and we'll see, we're going to use the WSL tool. We'll see that the WSL executable, is going to launch us into our default distribution. So we can set that up accordingly. Maybe this does take a few minutes. Okay, there we go. Just had to threaten it for that I was going to go away. So now, enter a new Unix username. I'm going to use sysadmin. You can use whatever you want. Now, I just want to be clear, right? You don't have to have a Windows 10 VM to utilize Windows Subsystem for Linux. If you are running on Windows 10 and it's modern, it's updated, you have access to Windows Subsystem for Linux on your machine, right? The only reason I'm doing this from a VM is because I want to sort of show you the entire process from start to finish. So I'm going to add a password here. It's going to ask me to reconfirm. Okay, and here I am. I'm in my Linux terminal now. Let me make that just a little bit bigger. So I'm going to clear. Now, one of the first things we're going to want to do, and this is something that we're probably going to want to do on an ongoing basis, is sudo apt-get update and sudo apt-get upgrade. So let's just sort of, if you're new to Linux, let's just walk through this real quickly. Sudo stands for super user do. So if you need to do something with elevated privileges, you can prefix it with sudo. It'll prompt you for your password if you're one of the users that is allowed to have sudo rights. And then you can, after you enter that password, it will run it with elevated permissions. It's kind of like run as administrator in Windows. APT is a package manager for Ubuntu. So, there are all of these underlying packages and applications that are running on the distribution. Python is one of them, for example. Sudo apt-get update is going to go out and refresh the list of, sort of current iterations of the packages that are installed. And then this and, right, says execute this command first. And when this completes successfully, then execute this command. That's what the and is, right? Sudo apt-get upgrade is going to upgrade all of those packages based on what it found. Yeah, Daniel, it is, I think, pretty cool. So I'm going to enter my password. So it's going out now, and it's sort of refreshing the package list. It's going to, here in a minute, prompt me to say, are you ready for me to install these things? I'm going to say yes. And then I'm going to flip back to the PowerPoint and let this sort of run, because it does take a few minutes, and I don't want to have us sit here and watch this tick by. You won't be missing anything. You'll just be missing a bunch of stuff that sort of runs through the screen here. And I'll sort of cover off what happens when we come back. We just need to get to the yes, no prompt here shortly. Okay, so do you want to continue? I'm going to say yes. And then I'm going to let that run, and we will come back to it. Okay, so let's talk about Windows and Linux file system integration. And let's actually, I will show you some of this just in my, my current installation of WSL while we're waiting for the other one to sort of update. So I know we're kind of flipping back and forth here a little bit. Just bear with me. I want to show you the process of installation. That's why we're using the VM. But while that is updating, I still want us to be able to move forward and cover off on some material. So crossing over, we continue to have access to our Windows command prompt, right? Just like any other installation of Windows. But now we also have access to Linux commands through WSL. And the cool thing is we can run those commands through the separate app, or we can link up the PowerShell, for example, to WSL and run the commands that way. Windows binaries can be launched or called from Linux. Linux binaries can be called from Windows via WSL, which is, I think, again, pretty cool. And there are ways to get access to the two file systems across, right? Within the Linux shell, you can get access to the Windows file system using the /mount /MNT mount point, right? So /MNT/C will give me access to the C drive in Windows on the Linux side, okay? From Windows Explorer, you can also access a sort of specialized share //WSL $ that lets you from Windows see the Linux file system. So it just gives you the ability to have visibility from one to the other. And you can copy applications, files, programs between the two and launch between the two as well. So it's like having two side-by-side operating systems running together, aware of each other and able to interact. A lot of times, like what I do is I map a network drive to this share, so then I have available that available, but you don't have to do that. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of sort of commands here. Let me bring this up. And let me make this larger. All right, so now I'm in, Ubuntu. I clear this. Now, we have access to all of these sort of, commands that we're used to from a Linux perspective. That is, if you've done Linux before, right? So to list the directory or to get my current directory, I can do pwd. It's my personal working directory, right? To list the contents, I can do an ls. I can see hidden files with an ls-a. And then we'll see here, maybe if you have some experience with Linux, we'll see some things that you might be used to seeing. This .bash_history is going to give you all of the commands, a history of the commands that have been executed, right? Linux keeps track of those, so you can up arrow, down arrow to rerun a previous command, a previously executed command. There's bash logout, which we can use for executing tasks for cleanup on logout of the system. And then there's bash RCM profile, where we can do things like, set up environment variables that will be in place every time we launch Linux. Okay. So I am going to, let's see what we got here. Let me remove this from last night. I can start. Okay. I'm going to make a new directory called learn WSL. I'm going to change to that directory. These are all Linux commands I'm executing, right? I'm executing them, though, in a distribution that's running natively within Windows 10. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file, a new HTML file, touch wsl-rocks.html. And then I'm going to use a text editor on the Linux side to actually add some content to this file. Nano is a good one. There's Vim as well. Vim's a little tougher to use if you're not used to it. So we'll use Nano. Nano's, fairly low barrier of entry. I'm going to say Nano against that existing file. And it gives me a text editor here within Linux. I'm going to go out here and grab the text that is in the lesson, rather than you watch me type it. Now, the one thing you need to be aware of with WSL is Control-V, Control-C doesn't usually work for copy-paste. You'll probably have to use right-click. But one of the cool things is right-click will actually paste. So I click the right mouse button, and it actually pasted the text into my text editor here. And then down at the bottom, I can use Control with these commands to, for example, exit. So if I do Control X, do I want to save? Yes, I do. I'm going to leave the same file name. Control Shift V, good call out, Mary. Yeah, that is true. You can use that as well. Control-Shift-V. But it does take a little bit of getting used to. The other thing I should mention that takes maybe a little bit of getting used to is the fact that it's case sensitive. Linux is case sensitive, right? So that is going to matter when it comes to navigating or attempting to navigate the file system. Thanks for sharing that, Mayor. It was great. Any questions? Please feel free to post them into the chat, or I love the interaction or the commentary. That's great. Okay, so I've got this file now, and if I so I do my list contents, and there's wsl-rocks.html. Okay. How do I connect to the machine via remote desktop? You mean how do you connect to the Linux? So if you have Linux, a Linux distribution running within your I'm not sure what you mean there, Mayor. Sorry. How do you connect to the machine via remote desktop? Let's come back to that. Let me keep going here, and then we'll come back. All right. Let me launch Windows Explorer. And as I said, one of the shares that we can use is WSL $. And we're going to see here, if you're asking, Amir, how do you sort of SSH into the Linux distribution that's running? I'm not sure you can do that. I've not done that before. That's a great question. Something worth trying. If it's possible, I assume you would just SSH against the, you would need port 22 open. That's something I'd have to try. So good question. So you can see here, right, that we're able to navigate into the file system that is in Linux, but I'm doing so from Windows Explorer. And if I navigate here, you'll see your Learn WSL folder. There's the file I just created. And then if I double click it, I can actually launch it and see it running, right? Which not a very interesting, HTML page, but you do see that we're able to, from Windows, access the Linux file system and, list the directory contents, including launching a file if we want. And by the way, again, here are the steps that I am walking through if you want to follow along. So we're in the integration between Windows and Linux file systems space. So we're kind of walking through this section here. There's the HTML. So if you want to follow along, you can definitely do that if you already have WSL installed. All right, so now let's take another sort of interesting look. Let me launch PowerShell. Actually, PowerShell. Let me launch the Windows command prompt. This up. Okay, so now I'm on the Windows side again, right? And so to list the contents of a directory in Windows, I do dir. To clear the screen, I do cls. If I tried ls for listing contents, it's going to say it's not recognized. If I tried clear, it's going to say it's not recognized, right? Because those are Linux commands. This is a Windows command prompt. But if I prefix or preface these commands with WSL or bash, I can actually launch those commands here from the Windows command prompt. So WSL clear will execute. WSL ls will list, right? So we're basically running the Linux commands, but we're running them through WSL from the Windows command prompt. Questions, comments? Okay. One of the other cool things that we can do, let's see, is WSL. No, WSL's, it has to be Windows 10 or Windows Server 2019. That question from Sam. Good question, good clarifying question. Okay, let me go over to my my Linux command prompt here. One of the cool things that you can do is you can launch Notepad.exe from Linux, right? Now, the thing to keep in mind, right, is in some cases, we might be able to do just Notepad on the Windows side and it will work. We need to have the entire ipconfig.exe. The casing needs to match, but we can, do that here as well. And basically execute those Windows binaries, right, from the Linux terminal. So really, the point of this is just to sort of show, right, how we can, we have options now, right? We have these two operating systems running. They're fully aware of each other, fully able to interact with each other, and we have multiple options for making that interaction happen. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to launch PowerShell. Now, one of the things that we can do here from PowerShell is if I type WSL but don't include any commands, that's going to flip me over to the Linux terminal running within PowerShell, right? But it's going to reference me relative to the current folder, which is my user directory. And you can see here that it's utilizing the Windows path on my C drive, the users, and then that's my username. Okay, and then I can now list that contents, etc. But these give us options in terms of what we're able to do. So you can either launch the Ubuntu app, right? So you could either run using this. You could run using command prompt, because here you can, see, I always do that. You can do WSL here as well, or you can do so through PowerShell. So you have quite a few options. Now let's look at, running Python through this, which we're actually able to do as well. So I can see Python 3 -- version, Python's installed, which is great. We can actually execute Python interactively. So if I'm going to say print hello reactors, I can say x equals 1, y equals 2, x plus y, right? So those sort of Python commands we can execute interactively. We can also capture them within a .py file, right? And then run them as we would any other, sort of Python application that we're interested in executing. So we have Python available to us. We can run virtual environments here. If you used VENV, we can run a Python 3 HTTP server. Oh, sorry. Python 3 HTTP.server. Okay, that's now listening. I can go over here to my browser, type HTTP localhost 8000. And then if I hit wslrocks.html, it's not finding it. Oh, I have to be in the folder, of course. Sorry. Let me just flip over here and do it from here. Python 3 HTTP server. See if that's not found, of course, because I'm still not in the folder. sorry about that. So what we were able to do is basically I needed to navigate to the folder where the file was located. This HTML file that we put together, but then I can just start up this Python, this HTTP server in Python from the Windows terminal, from the Linux terminal, right? Rather, and then we have the ability web server running, right? Now this is pretty rudimentary as a web server is concerned. In a minute, we're going to look at Node.js as a more interesting, maybe implementation of a web server running through WSL. But hopefully this gives you sort of a feel for the options we have for sort of flipping back and forth. Any questions at all or comments? Okay. We do have one. What's the limitations of WSL? For example, would one be able to build and run a medium Linux-sized project from GitHub using Npm Install? Yes, you could. You actually could. Some of the limitations are going to be more of the limitations of your machine. So, basically however much you have running on your machine and how much power you have on the machine, that's going to be the limitation. But in terms of execution environment, you're quite able to do that. Good question. Okay, so let's go ahead. Any other questions? All righty. All right, so let's, basically let's install Node.js. And so the next sort of lesson is creating a website with Node.js. We're going to be sort of walking through this if you want to follow along. Let's see, do we have another question come in? Will the recording be published? It will. It'll be published to the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. It may be a day or two, but it will be out there. And as I said at the end here, I will provide you with a link to a GitHub repo, which has my slides in it as well, if you want to use those. And then you'll have the ability to sort of go back through this information as well, because there is a lot of detail here, and I know it might be hard to follow along. Hopefully I'm not moving too quickly. It's just, I think the overall time sort of estimated for this learning module is like 1 hour and 42 minutes. We obviously only have 60 minutes. So there definitely will be some things that you want to go back and I think revisit to sort of step through. All right, so for this step, let's flip back over to our VM. So here's my VM, right? I created, you're welcome, Eli. I created, I enabled the WSL feature in this Windows 10 VM. I then, went to the Microsoft Store and got my Ubuntu distribution and installed it. And now I'm able to launch into that. It asked me for a Unix username, a password, and then I ran my package updates using apt-get, right? And that's all of this is what resulted from that processing. So let me clear this screen. And now what we're going to do is we're going to install in Node and NPM here, right? If you don't have any experience, at the end, I will provide you with a link that has some tutorials for Node and Express. So if you're not familiar with Node and Express, Express is just a way to sort of serve up HTTP or serve up pages or responses using HTTP requests. Node is a framework that we can run within based on JavaScript. And then NPM is a package manager for Node. So when you build out a Node web server or website, you'll often have those three tools, Node.js, NPM, and Express included, and that's what we're going to kind of do here. So following along the steps that are within the Microsoft Learn unit, I'm going to first go, I'm going to copy this rather than type it in. I'm going to use curl, which is a tool in Linux you can use to issue web requests, right? So you can curl against the web page and it'll come back with all of the HTML. It's not very pretty, right? It's not graphical like we'd be used to seeing or would want to see for web navigation. But it does do the trick in terms of command line integration for web requests. So what this is going to do is go out and get the latest source for Node and NPM, and then we'll actually it will actually give us some instructions on how to install Node once this completes. All right, so to install, right, we just basically execute this command. I'm going to right click, which copies, and then down here I'm going to right click. Okay. Copies. And then right click to paste. Pardon me. This is going to install Node and it's going to install NPM. While that's running, just a couple of sort of slides to help illustrate this. So we're going to use curl to pull the latest version of Node.js and NPM. We'll use apt-get to install, which is what you're watching me do. I'm going to use then npm to install Express, which provides HTTP request handling. And then we can verify that we have all of those things installed using the -- version flag. One of the cool things about Node is it's extensible, right? There are packages available for you to pull into your application. So if you need logging, rather than building that code yourself, you can use npm to pull in a logging library like Winston, and then have access to that going forward. Node.js can be utilized from the command line interactively, so we'll see that shortly. But it can also be utilized, for example, we can use Express to stand up a new site. And then we'll be able to sort of walk through that site and navigate it accordingly. So let's see if this is completed. Okay, so let me clear here. Okay, so if I type node -- version, I see I have Node installed, npm -- version, npm is installed. Now I can run npm install, and I can use Express generator, and then I can use a -g flag. So npm is no package manager. Install says pull this particular library. And when you install a library, right, you can either install it local to the folder that you're currently in or the project that you're currently working in, or you can install it globally. The -g will install it globally. And usually we install things, what we install globally are things like tools, Express, that we're probably going to utilize across multiple projects. So if I run this, and I probably need to include sudo. Usually if you get something like this that says permission denied, it's because you need elevated permissions. So if I prefix it with sudo, then it should work. Let me clear this. And now if we type express -- version, we should see that that is installed as well. Okay, questions, comments? All right. So what I can now do is I can type node, and that will launch me into sort of an interactive session for writing node code. os.platform. You can even see IntelliSense, right? We're running on Linux. os.architecture, x64, os.cpus. Shows you the sort of information about the CPUs I have running on this particular machine. Okay. So what I'm going to do next, right, is I'm actually going to generate a full website, if you will. So let me exit out of here. Clear this. We don't have anything in our folder right now, but I can type express hello world, and then I can use --view equals pug. And that's basically going to build out a sort of bare bones website for me, right? That uses Node and Express, and it uses this view templating engine called pug. So make sure I can keep the questions in front of me if anyone has any. So we have now this, sort of this folder structure, right? Hello world. If I navigate into hello world, we see all of these files, right? Cat is another utility you can use in Linux to view file contents. So if I do a cat against app.js, I'll see all of the code there. Now, this is, probably a little difficult to work in from a development perspective. But what we're going to see here shortly is that we can install Visual Studio Code and then look at this from Visual Studio Code. So we'll do that shortly. But first thing we can do is type debug equals hello world npm start. Oh, I'm at the wrong. One of the things when you use Node, you need to run an npm install to pull down all of the necessary libraries that have been specified for inclusion with this application. So for example, if I had added the Winston library for logging, when you pulled that code from GitHub onto your machine, you would need to run npm install to make sure you have all of the local dependencies available. Let's see if this works now. Okay, there we go. Yeah, well, and so we can actually here eventually. Oh, sorry. If I navigate to HTTP, localhost 3000, we see our Express server, our web server, our very, very bare bones website is running. Okay, but interacting with it from a coding perspective is a little clumsy right here. So let's look at some ways that we can sort of facilitate that. And we are very close to being out of time, but I'm going to get as much of this in as I can. If you haven't used Visual Studio Code, I think it's a phenomenal tool because it's a great IDE, very user-friendly from a developer experience perspective, and then it has gives you access to a ton of very, very valuable extensions that you can layer on top of Visual Studio Code for many, many different types of languages. So we can install Visual Studio Code. It's probably good to install Git as well. You can use apt-get install Git to install it from the Linux side if you want within WSL. And then in VS Code, when we launch VS Code or Visual Studio Code, if we have WSL enabled, likely it's going to see that and say, hey, I see WSL is enabled here. Do you want me to install the sort of recommended extensions that go along with this? Now, the one we're going to be wanting to install is remote-WSL, but we'll see that actually, kind of prompts us for in a real user-friendly manner. That gives us basically a VS Code editor and execution, mechanism that's running within the context of WSL. I think it's a pretty cool developer experience, and it defaults the terminal to WSL bash. You can actually debug in Visual Studio Code. So again, as I said, there's a lot of information we're sort of covering off here. You can debug in Visual Studio Code. If you create a file, config file at launch.json, then you can basically set breakpoints, run that, and then interactively step through your code accordingly, which is very helpful. So let's quickly, in the last couple of minutes that we have here, let's see what that sort of process looks like. So if you want to install Visual Studio Code, I mean, I gave you the link there, but if you just search for download VS Code, you're likely to come across it. Oh, nice, Mayor, good job. Any gotchas using full fat VS with the .NET Core project in WSL? No, it's just full VS Visual Studio. I don't think has the same level of integration that you have within Visual Studio Code. I've not honestly done it before, but in terms of, because you can get access to the files, right? The file system is available. You should be able to run it through there as well. Okay, so I'm gonna download Visual Studio Code here. You got it. And thanks, Mayor, for posting that link. That's awesome. I'll take a look at that. All right, so I'm on Windows, so I'm gonna download Visual Studio Code. Dang it. I'm gonna open this. Don't worry about that. I'm gonna say accept. I'm just gonna use all of the defaults and let that installation begin. While that's executing, I'm gonna go over here and say download Git. And so I can navigate here. It's very, very cool how well integrated Git is with Visual Studio Code. I mean, it is a pretty fantastic tool, in my opinion. Let me launch this. Just takes a sec here. All right, so that is done. I'm not going to launch it just yet. There we go. Well, that took a bit. I'm going to leave all of the defaults in place here. So I'm clicking through these quickly, but just so you know, I'm not changing anything. I'm just letting it stay at the default. You could obviously, as with any installation, change options. I'm going to let that installation complete. Just a couple of more minutes here, and then we'll be wrapping up. While that is installing, let me grab a couple of links here to make them available to you. One of them is this Microsoft Learn module. One of them is the tutorial we talked about. One of them is a little bit more involved set of instructions for installing and enabling WSL. And then one is a link to a GitHub repo where you can find the slides for today. We're also going to have a survey that we'll want you to do here. So bear with me for just a sec. So if I finish that installation and now I launch Visual Studio Code, let me make this zoom in. You'll see down here, you have Windows Subsystem for Linux installed. Do you want to install the recommended extensions for it? I'm going to say yes. And you'll see here, it's going to want to install this remote-WSL. So once that's installed, we now have an option down here in the bottom left. If I click this, I can open a folder in WSL. You'll see my Ubuntu, sort of file system. I'm going to navigate into my Hello World application. Actually going to open that folder. And then you see here, it's setting up that WSL context. Just takes a sec here. Thanks, Emma. Yeah, Emma just posted a survey link and the event code that you'll use. Please fill that out. That is helpful for you to specify for us information that you'd like to see in these sessions that you think would be beneficial, etc. We definitely welcome that feedback. But now you see, right, we have the development environment here, which is a lot better than the terminal we were just in, right? And it's running within the WSL context. And so if I hover over Express here, from an IntelliSense perspective, it might show us, what does it do? It creates an Express application. If we did app dot, it's going to show me options available, right? And so what we can do here is if let me save that. If I open a new terminal, I now have a bash command prompt here. I can run npm install again just to make sure. I know we ran it already, but let's run it again. And now you can run npm start. And if I attempt to navigate over here again, I should still see my Express application running. Now, the last thing I want to cover up on, and then we'll call it a day, is debugging. So say I wanted to, sort of break on this line. If I go to my debug tab here, if you will, I can create a new launched JSON file. And I can say I want to be able to debug a Node.js application. Once I do that, I can hit start debugging. And then if I come over here and refresh again, it looks like it didn't hit my breakpoint. Try this again. I'm not sure why it's not hitting the breakpoint. Let's try a different one here. Maybe I didn't save this. Well, it should hit the breakpoint. I'm not sure why it's not. Oh, wait a minute. Is it actually not? It just does not want to hit that breakpoint. Try one more thing here and then we'll call it. There may be I might have a firewall issue here. Basically, what you should be able to do, though, I'm not sure why this isn't working. It should be able to launch basically the using this launch.json file. It should take you into the debug thread for this. Not sure why it's not doing what I expect it to here. Let me try one more thing. Start debugging. There you go. Now it hit it. Let me just launch a new window. Just will not hit that breakpoint. All right, I don't want to spend any more time on it. This should work. It was working last night. I'm not sure why it's not working now, but let's go ahead and look to wrap up here. That actually should operate the way I've described it, but for some reason it is not currently working that way. So might need to exit, might need to reboot, any of those things that we typically do within our environments as we're trying to build out our applications and might encounter some issues. So just do a quick summary. What did we cover? Enabling WSL, installing that Linux distribution. We talked about the integration between the file systems, I should say. We looked at creating a website with Node.js in the context of WSL, setting up VS Code with integration to WSL, and then we looked at debugging, even though it didn't operate the way I wanted it to. As far as follow-ups, those are the links that I sent out. Please leverage those. The only other link that is included that's not shown here is a link to that GitHub repository that has the slide deck. Definitely take an opportunity to walk back through this information, walk back through the, you're welcome, Daniel, walk back through the recording and try this yourself, right? That's the best way to sort of really, I think, absorb it. And if there are any final questions or comments, definitely I'll give you an opportunity to do that. But please fill out that survey using 13074 as the event code. That information is very, very helpful. Any final questions or comments before we wrap? All right. Well, it was a pleasure for me to, let's see, maybe we have a question here. How stable is WSL? How heavy is it on RAM usage? It's a great question. How stable is WSL? Because you may remember days of the blue death screens of dual boot. Yeah. It's not, it's much more stable. WSL is very, very stable. It's being used a lot. It's being developed actively. So yeah, I'm hoping, I'm thinking and hoping, Sam, that you wouldn't run into those same problems that you did before. From a, you do sometimes, Mayor says he sometimes experiences performance. I've not seen it, but you know, it doesn't mean that it wouldn't happen. Depends probably what else I have running on my machine. Let's see from a task manager perspective if we can. Let's see. What do run in here? Now this is going to show high memory usage, but possibly because I am on a Zoom and I'm running an RDP session. Yeah, I don't know how much what the RAM usage is. It may be. Oh, you're mostly using IntelliJ. Yeah, I've not had that same experience, Mayor, but it could be. I can't find it right now. I would have to do a little digging. Let me just put it this way. Experientially, I've not seen issues. Mayor actually has, so I think you could. Jamie says he outgrew WSL, or they outgrew WSL due to limitations around address ranges used and conflicting with VPN. Yeah, also some bugs around having to sync the HW clock after coming out of hibernation, but generally really promising. Okay, so again, everybody's going to have a different experience. I've not experienced some of these things, but that certainly doesn't invalidate the experiences that these folks are talking about. So try it, right? Give it a shot, work on it, walk yourself through it, learn about it, and then you can try some sample workloads and see if you do run into some of the same issues. I've not, others have, but I think it's definitely a technology that's worth looking at. Really appreciate your time. Sorry we went over a little bit, but I wanted to try to get as much info in as we could. For me, it was a tremendous pleasure being with you, and I hope you got a lot out of this and enjoyed it. Have a great day. You got it.